Hello, I'm Richard Velleman. I'm one of the originators of the five-step method, and welcome to our five-step method discussion on using step one, a step which is all about listening, reassuring, exploring the concerns of the affected family member. So I would like to start off with introducing our panel to you today. We have Richard McVeigh, who is Aquarius's head of service. Aquarius is a charity which runs a range of services across the Midlands in England, supporting people affected by alcohol or drugs or gambling and their families. Many of you will recognize Richard from our original five-step method DVD or clips from it, where he demonstrated using the five-step method. These demonstrations were made over 10 years ago, but they're still just as valid today. And annoyingly, Richard looks almost exactly the same as he did 10 years ago. Our second person on our panel is Jill Velleman. She's the lead five-step method international coordinator and the lead international assessor for the five-step method. Ed Seipler is a health development specialist in alcohol and drugs with the South Eastern Health and Social Care Trust in Northern Ireland, and one of the originators of Steps to Cope, an intervention based on the five-step method for adolescents having to deal with parental problems. And he is a five-step method practitioner. And Wendy Schrapp from the Jelinek organization in Holland. Jelinek is the leading alcohol, drugs and addiction agency in Holland. And Wendy is a five-step method practitioner and is about to become a five-step method assessor. We're going to look at two sets of questions today. The first one is we're going to start off by finding out what the panel have seen that is evidence of good practice in the use of step one in the five-step method, and what this means both for the practitioner and the affected family member. So can I turn first to Richard and ask you, what do you think is evidence of good practice?
I think it's, for me, Richard, it's really important in terms of the first step when somebody's beginning to tell their stories that we thank them for seeking help. Why that's important is many family members will feel a sense of failure. They'll have tried everything they can to try and make a difference or try and affect a change in somebody's substance use or gambling. And seeking help for them may feel like they've done something wrong or they've failed in the process. I think it's really important that we counteract that by seeing and communicating to the person that seeking help is a real strength and an asset in them, doing that. And it's about, a really positive thing in there. They're looking to seek a resolution to a very stressful life situation, and also trying to improve the situation for everybody concerned, not just the focal person with the issue, but everybody concerned around them. So kind of really communicating what a positive step it is to actually be seeking help and to talk about the problem, I think is massively important. The other aspects really what I wanted to sort of say as well is the real strength of the approach with five-step is it is non-stigmatizing and it's non-pathologizing. We're taking an approach that says the reason why somebody has a problem with alcohol, drugs or gambling is not because of something wrong in the makeup or the approach of families. We're creating a sense and communicating that people have been doing their best to try and cope with a very difficult set of circumstances and a very stressful situation. What we are here to communicate is that we're going to build on the strengths and kind of the resources that they're already using and see if we can help them extend and improve that and help them and find other ways of kind of dealing with the situation as well. So again, really sort of supporting the self-efficacy of the family member in seeking help.
Thank you, Richard. That's really helpful, and I think a very good way to start us off. And let me just emphasize what you've just been saying, really, that many people will see things that they've been somehow a failure. They've not been a good enough parent, they've not been a good enough partner, and that somehow they're partially responsible for the problem. And certainly they shouldn't be thinking about themselves in this situation. So trying to help people realize that actually seeking help is a very positive step is really, really important. for them and for their ability to work through the five-step method. And the fact that the five-step method is so non-stigmatizing, so non-pathologizing, that our approach is that people really have been doing the best that they can in a very difficult situation, and they need to be congratulated for that and then helped to move forward, as opposed to thinking they've done anything wrong, and they've got it wrong. Those are two incredibly important points. Thank you, Richard. Jill, can I turn to you? What do you think is evidence of good practice?
I think the first thing to say is about the practitioner being patient. If the family member initially wants to talk about the person they're concerned about or other family members, let them do that to begin with. It's really valid and understandable that you might be the first person they've ever talked to about this situation. So they will want to talk about the person they're concerned about. But after an appropriate amount of time and summarising their concerns, listening to them, reflecting back, there will be a point that the practitioner needs to direct the attention to how it's affecting the family member. So have a balance between listening to the family member, but then making sure the attention is drawn to them. And when I'm listening to recordings, I think the good practice I hear is that the family member feels listened to, but the practitioner has skillfully moved the session on to focus on the family member and their concerns and their fears. And the second area of good practice is not rushing the session. It's really ensuring that the family member has the opportunity to tell the story, express their stresses and strains that they've been experiencing, and exactly what fears they've got. So again, if I'm assessing a session for a practitioner to become accredited, my test of good practice is, can I in effect summarise the family member's story? Can I summarise the concerns and fears of that family member, and particularly how they're feeling?
I think this thing about being patient is incredibly important. In fact, it's very well demonstrated in our original video by Richard when he does a step one, an extract from a step one, where the mother he's talking to is only concerned, to start off with, about her son. And Richard doesn't say, no, we're not here to talk about him, we're here to talk about you. He lets her talk about him quite a lot, and then finds out very, very subtly, very carefully, how it's been affecting other people, how it's been affecting her husband. And then after some time, he's able to say, and it feels very, very natural, so you told me it's been affecting everybody else, how's it affected you? And that allowed her to actually start to talk about something which she wouldn't have been able to talk about if they'd started the session off in that way. So the thing about being patient, but still remaining in control of that process is really very, very important. And as you say, not rushing to be helpful, but actually listening very carefully and allowing the family member really to talk about what their concerns are and getting some really detailed understanding of that, rather than thinking, oh, well, I've heard so many family members, I know what they're talking about, I'll jump on to something else. So very, very helpful indeed. Thank you, Jill. Can I turn to Ed now for what you think is good practice?
Okay, thanks, Richard. Yeah, I think two things that are really crucially important when you start that step one with a family member. One is listen for that immediate risk that might need action, because safe practice, keeping the family members safe through this process, is crucial. So those key things you're listening for: domestic violence, adult safeguarding, risk to children, you're paying particularly attention and listening for that, because that may need action that you need to take steps to help that family member be safe. On the other side, there's other risks that may also come up in terms of the family members' mental health and physical health. So you're paying particularly attention and a sensitivity to those. The other thing to be prepared for, because when you begin to hear that family member's story, and this may be related to risk, you may experience a very strong expression of emotion. Be prepared for it. And that's where your core counseling skills come in, and particularly your use of reflective listening. because you want the family member to be heard. And sometimes it's not what you helping the family hear what they're saying, but also what they're saying non-verbally. So your use of reflective listening is a crucial tool to help that expression of feeling.
Ed, thank you very much indeed. Two really important points again about listening for immediate needs and risk, and calculating whether things need to be dealt with very speedily or whether you've heard them, you can make sure that the family member knows you've heard them, but they're something which you can safely leave to be discussed later in other steps. And recognizing that it's very likely that people will be feeling a great deal of emotion talking about this very difficult family problem for them, and being prepared to accept that emotion, allow people to express it, deal with it in a very positive way, and move on over that as well. So terribly important points. Thank you very much, Ed. Let me move now to Wendy and to hear your examples of good practice.
Thank you, Richard. I think a lot of family members get very emotional because a lot of them are talking about their situation for the first time. And if it's not the first time, then it might be the first time someone's really listening and really wanting to know how it's for them to be in this situation. So I'd say normalizing feelings that come across, normalizing expression of emotions, normalizing people to cry or to be very angry or whatever happens is something we really need to do in the first step to make sure they see and hear and notice they are free to express everything that's in it for them. Their process is the most important thing in 5-step. So their emotions are as well. And I think besides the normalizing, it's very important to give people hope when they start. So when people feel really sad and are at the point they think it will never change, it can be so relieving to hear someone say, I've heard this a lot, and I can also hear that you are very hardworking and very emotional right now. And we'll see that in the end, you'll come further and things will change. And we've seen that in so many other people we've talked to. So the expression of hope and things will change can be very important as well, I think. And last thing is to keep structure. We already heard about it a bit, but I think keeping structure and time management is very important in this first bit, because there's a lot to do, and there are a lot of things we want to know and we want to go through, and we don't want to rush things. We really want to keep the family member talking and feeling safe and expressing everything they need to express. So I think setting a good agenda at the beginning and helping family members get through is really important here too. Yeah.
Thank you, Wendy. 3 very important points, but actually an overarching one as well, which is that this first session sets the situation for all the other sessions. The way we come across in this first session is very, very important, because it tells a family member how we're going to be in other sessions and how we're going to do things in other sessions. So the 3 things you pointed out about ensuring that there's a good structure and a good agenda and good time management. That's something that's going to go throughout the 5 steps. Ensuring that you normalize people's experiences and that you give people permission to express their emotions, to talk about the difficulties that they're going through. That's going to happen throughout, and that normalization happens throughout. And expressing appropriate hope that things can change and that we will work together so that they will be able to make change, again, is an essential idea throughout the whole of the 5 steps. So what we do in this first step, as well as all the other things everyone's talked about, is set the conditions so that people know what to expect in all the other steps. Thank you very much indeed panel. That's a really helpful answer to our first question, which is what do you think about signs of good practice? I'd like to move to the second one now, which is about common problems that we've seen in practitioners' delivery of step one and how those common problems can be overcome. So I'd like to start off with, if I may, with going to Ed about the beginning of the session. So that one of the things that one of our criteria that we use when we ask people to assess themselves to see whether they're doing 5-step well is, have they structured the beginning of the session? Have they done a number of things in that beginning which are really important? Ed, what do you think are some of the common problems you've seen and how do we overcome them?
Yeah, and I think if we take thanks, Richard. And I think if we take what Jill and Wendy and Richard have all said, be patient, set the structure, create that warmth. And one of the common problems is the practitioner is so keen to get into it and tell the story, they forget to set the structure, the agenda, so the family member knows what to expect. And that's useful for all the steps. That you set the agenda. Today we're going to. And when you relate it to the stress strain coping model, you help the family member see the overarching. So step one is about telling their story. But if they know what's coming next around information and coping and support, well, then you're not rushing it. You're setting the structure. So family members know what to expect. And you create that structure. And Wendy, you said something really important about time management, because you don't want to rush it. And step one is so important. So it's about them telling their story. But if they know what to expect, that is really, really helpful.
Ed, thank you very much indeed for that. That's very helpful. Jill, our second criterion is about allowing the family member to describe the situation and tell their story and listen to the family member and ask about their concerns and fears and emotions. What do you think some of the problems are and how do we overcome them?
I think the first issue is often the practitioner, they've gained a lot of information about the person the family member is concerned about. And sometimes that can run away. So you can be listening to a tape for assessment and they're 25 minutes in and they haven't actually got on to what the concern is for the family member and what their stresses and strains are. So it's really vital that we talk about the practitioner taking control of the session, the process, and the family member being in charge of the content. So it's to then reorientate the session after an appropriate amount of time. It's vital to use the results of the family member questionnaire, because that would have given a lot of information to discuss and elaborate on. So it's very helpful if the practitioner summarizes, say 10 minutes in that step, to say, can I check I've understood you correctly? Your main concerns maybe are about the effect on the family finances, but also you're very worried about your husband's health. And this means you're very anxious and you're not sleeping properly. Are there any other ways this is affecting you? So you're summarizing what you've heard, and then you're opening the question back up to really explore those concerns, fears, stresses and strains. So that's the first issue. The second issue is practitioners, particularly in the early sessions and the early training of 5-step, people want to be really helpful. They want to fix things. And I often hear practitioners, they move very quickly into fix-it mode. They start moving on to coping. They start moving on by giving tips of how to cope. And the key point is, don't be in a rush to be helpful. So even if the family member wants you to initially provide solutions and fix the situation, it's back to this summarizing, reorientating the session to the purpose of step one. So fully explore those stresses and strains and let them know that you will be looking at a later stage about the coping mechanisms, but you want to have a good understanding with that family member about the whole situation and the whole story. So they're my two key points.
Jill, thank you very much indeed. Okay, if I move over to the third criterion, which is about identifying relevant stresses and how the family member has been affected. Richard McVeigh, can you tell me what common problems you've seen with that area?
I think one of the problems that might occur is if somebody's got a general level of counselling skills or listening skills, they may look at step one and kind of assume, oh, I know this. It's just about listening. But I guess what is really important for people to remember is that this is a structured conversation, and we are looking for a particular focus around what the stresses and strains are. So more than just your listening skills, we are directing attention both for us and the family member on identifying what those stresses and strains are. So it's really important that you probe further and actually pay attention to what those stresses may be. What are the situations that are occurring? Be asking about what situations occur and how they make the person feel. Whether it's, in terms of accidents the person may be having as a result of alcohol and drug use, whether it's impact on finances, whether it's the effect on family relationships. You're looking for the different spheres of somebody's life that are impacted. And the curiosity, the professional curiosity to ask, and how does it affect this aspect? How does it affect relationships? How does it affect, finances? Is actually directing the questions to that, so you can scope and help the person identify what the impacts are. They will tell you what are the most important stresses. Sometimes what we need to do is help the person scope the impacts on their life so they can identify the key stresses for them. So for me as well, it is the ability to then be able to identify how those stresses affect strains on the person. How is it affecting their psychological or mental well-being? How's it affecting their physical health? How do those stresses display themselves for that person? So how does it affect them emotionally, in terms of what level of anxiety they have, the sadness they may feel, the frustration, the anger, the sense of kind of all the different emotions that may occur for them, and how it may impact on them in terms of whether they feel down, whether they feel anxious, and to what extent is that impacting on their ability to function. And secondly, how it then affects their health, physical health, what are the strains in terms of how it affects their sleep? How does it affect their pre-existing physical health conditions they have? How are they exacerbated? As we know, stress can further impact existing health conditions somebody may have. Or it may be, having effects on people's, digestion, their diet, other aspects like that. So it's important that we look to identify those specific impacts rather than it being just a general conversation. I think those are really important aspects about this bit, the kind of how we can really sort of focus in on the impacts that it has for family members.
Richard, thank you. That was extremely helpful. And it just the range of examples you were giving there were just really very helpful in emphasizing for people that this isn't really simply using some good core counseling skills, doing some good active listening and nice, feeding back and summarizing and reflecting and so on, but reminding us that this is a structured intervention, and there are certain things that we're trying to enable the family member to talk about, certain things, bits of information we're trying to get out, because we know that's what we need to do the 5-step method properly. So that was incredibly helpful. Thank you, Richard. The fourth criterion is about thinking about who else there is in the family and how they may have been affected by these circumstances. So Wendy, can I ask you to tell me about common problems that you've seen with this criterion?
Yes. Oh, sorry. Yes, thank you. What we see is people kind of rush through the other family members or explore it until they have it all sorted out, like you do in step 4. And you have to search for something in between. So you're trying to find out which other people are significant. That can be other children, but also neighbors, people in school, friends, other relatives. people that are affected by the drug use or gambling, or but also affected by the stresses and strains you just found for the family member you're talking with. So usually there are people like other kids or parents, or I had a girl once who was really concerned about her brother, and in step 1 she found out that her main concern and her main stress-giving issue was the fact that their parents were really protective over their brother, and they kind of did things differently, and she was most affected by the fact that her parents were so affected. So sometimes it's really important to see the whole picture and everyone around the using relative and the stresses and strains that come across for other people as well. So when you ask, okay, so tell me, who else is in your family or in your structure that is affected? Who else is having stresses or strains? Who else is sleeping bad? What does that mean for you? How is it for you to see that your parents are affected so much that they have health issues they didn't have before? What does that mean for you? How does that affect you? So you can by focusing on the stresses and strains, you can already make the story more complete by looking at other things as well, and other people that are affected. And it gives you more clearance on how the situation is and also how it's evolving, so you can get back on it in later stages. And when you have seen what it does to other people, you can also see what it does to the family member you're talking with more clearly and more in depth. So I think it's really important to take a moment and to really ask about other people as well, and not only focus on the family member. We focus on the family member almost all the time. I'm sorry, Richard, but we have to focus a bit bigger every now and then as well to see the whole picture.
Wendy, thank you very much indeed. That's really helpful and very, very clear answer. I'm always in awe of you and others who manage to do this at such a high level in a language that's not your first language. I can't imagine being that competent. So thank you very much indeed. Let me move on to our 5th criterion, which is about normalizing the experience of family members. Ed, can I ask you to talk about that?
Yes, certainly, Richard. And I heard both Wendy and Richard talk about families feeling so isolated, so alone, feeling a failure. And when you're exploring, the stresses and strains, you're exploring, you're hearing that family story, it's so important that you're normalizing it. Now, it's useful for a practitioner to have different ways to put that back to a family member, so you don't sound like a broken record saying the same thing. It sounds, you're reflecting, you're really stressed about that. I can't tell you how common this is from all the family members I've heard. This is normal. It's a normal experience. Because if family members do feel so alone and so isolated, they feel something's wrong with me. And how anybody copes with that chronic, stress that comes along with, problem, alcohol use, gambling, drug addiction. They are very normal. There's no right or wrong here. It's normal.
Ed, thank you very much indeed for that. Okay, and our final criterion is about ending the session in a clear and structured way. Richard, can I ask you to comment about common problems that you've seen with that and how we should overcome them?
Yeah, I think it's much the same as it's important to have kept a structure throughout that session or that appointment with the family member, bringing it to an appropriate conclusion and kind of a proper ending to that session is really important for the family member's well-being. I think we certainly need to make sure that we don't run out of time and rush the ending, I think we're in a situation where somebody may have talked for the first time about some really distressing situations, and a lot of emotion may well have been expressed. It's really important that we provide the time for somebody to be able to pack that away at the end of that appointment so that they can go and get on with their life and still function. Don't be surprised if somebody's feeling a bit fragmented in terms of having talked about a lot of things that are impacting upon them and their family. So it's important we summarise what's been covered in that appointment, in that meeting, to look at the aspects that have been covered, to help the family member acknowledge the different aspects of how it's affecting their life and others, the stresses and strains that we've covered. And I guess there's the opportunity then to kind of help them look towards the next steps. It's kind of on the basis of the kind of the stresses that we've talked about with the family member, is then have a sense of what information, what information may be useful to them within step 2, and actually almost prepare the way in terms of asking them what might be useful for us to cover in terms of information in step 2. What are going to be the aspects of information about alcohol, drugs, and the addiction process, and how people change those. What aspects of that will be useful for me to bring and for us to talk about in step 2? Or what other information based on the needs you've described, whether it's to do with housing, whether it's to do with relationships, whatever else that you've heard has been impacted, is a sense of being able to bring back information for step 2 for the subsequent session that an appointment you'll provide. There's also the chance to kind of look at the self-help manual or the handbook, and really looking at how somebody may well be using that, so that the work doesn't just occur within the appointments where you meet them, that they're able to do some self-directed work and actually, use the handbook as a way of continuing the work in between the sessions. So the work continues. It's not just focused on when you meet together. I think those are some of the important aspects of a good ending, but certainly ensuring that, with a lot that may have been expressed, the chance to really bring that to an appropriate conclusion, because people have to go and get on with their lives and be able to function after. We don't want to leave them completely unpacked at the end of a session and not have the opportunity to kind of bring that to an appropriate conclusion.
Richard, thank you very much indeed for those comments. Very, very helpful again. And really, I'd just like to thank the panel very much indeed. So Richard, Jill, Wendy, Ed, a lot of incredibly helpful and very good advice and information that you passed across. Thank you very much indeed.
So just to recap some of the important points from our panel discussion. The most important, probably the overarching point, is how you deliver step 1 sets the tone for the whole intervention. You provide structure, you provide an agenda, you provide time management. And if you do that well, then family members know what to expect from all the other elements that are coming up, all the other steps. Another important point is that the family member seeking help is a real asset. It's a positive for them to have come to seek help. So I think reinforcing the welcome and saying how good it is that they've managed to come is terribly important. One of the things that came out throughout the discussion is that the 5-step method is a non-stigmatizing approach. People have been doing their best. What's happening is not their fault. And it's really important that we reinforce that throughout and make people feel as well as they can about the situation. We need to remember, moving on to the next point, that this may be the very first time they've ever talked to anyone about their situation. So I think we need to be really patient. We need to let people talk about the person they're concerned about, because that's what they are coming. That's the really important thing for them often in their lives at the moment. But then we need to focus on them as a family member. So that careful move of allowing people time to talk about the things that they think that are really important, to talk about the person with the problem, being patient with them, but then gradually enabling them to realize that it's also very important for them to talk about them and other members of the family. We need to remember to summarize frequently, and we need to make sure that we've got their story clear, what their fears are, what their concerns are. And we mustn't rush to help to fix the problem. What we've got to do is to let them talk and tell their story. We need to listen for immediate needs and risk. We need to ensure that the family knows that it's okay to express their emotions. People have a lot of emotions, and often they're very caught up in those emotions. It's very important that we allow them time and space to express those emotions and then to normalize that. We need to reinforce hope and the things that can change. And we have to remember that this is a semi-structured intervention. It's not just about active core listening skills. We need to use reflective listening. We need to ask for details about stresses and the resulting strain. We need to utilize the family member questionnaire answers that they've given, all of those things. And we need, obviously, as I said before, about time management and about structure. And at the end, we have to remember that we've spent maybe up to an hour getting people to unpack themselves, unpack their lives, unpack their emotions in this session. And one of the things that we have to do is to help them repack themselves so that they feel okay to leave and get on with their life outside. So I'd like to, again, thank everyone who was involved in the production of this video. Thank you very much.